All right, so moving right along, I'm going to put myself probably at 10th. I'll do my video if we get there last. This is my 11th ranked team, so we're doing Andre. We're doing Jersey Devils. So we start off the draft, number one overall, $79, Christian McCaffrey. What I like, what I don't like. So McCaffrey he had the most points per game last year for any fantasy player, 24.5 points per game. And the third most points among players, so right behind the top two quarterbacks, with 391 points. Like, he was over 100 points higher than the next closest player at running back, which was Breece Hall. So, yeah. I mean, it doesn't get better than like 1,400 yards rushing, another 550 yards receiving, 21 touchdowns, like crazy, stupid, huge numbers. He's found the perfect offense for him and the perfect offensive mind in Kyle Shanahan to use him. So, what don't I like? Well, I think McCaffrey's great. I think this is exactly what he's worth. I had him as an $8 player, so we're talking basically he paid for him at cost, what he is worth. I don't think his season will be quite as good. I mean, 1,400 yards is a lot. I would bet more around 1,200 yards rushing and then maybe 500 yards receiving, and maybe instead of 21 touchdowns, we're talking like 16, 17. That's still a lot. That's still basically a touchdown a game, but expecting him to have a season, basically a LaDainian Tomlinson-esque season like he had last year, it's asking for a lot. I mean, a lot of things have to break right. He would have to stay healthy the whole time. He's already coming into the season with a calf strain, so that kind of workload, just guys usually don't hold up like that for that long. I drafted McCaffrey twice, and twice he got hurt in Carolina. Now it's different in San Francisco. But, I mean, 2 years in a row, he's helped teams in our league win titles. 2 years in a row, he's been fantastic. 3 years in a row is asking for a lot. You know, if anyone can do it, he can do it. But I don't think he's going to have a season like he had last year. Last year was like borderline MVP kind of like running back seasons. And they want to limit the wear and tear on him, frankly. I mean, he has really good backups behind him, too. I would know. I have one of them. So I think they're gonna feed him a little bit less, not much less, but a little bit less. He'll still probably be the number one fantasy running back though. Then you doubled up. So number 2 overall, you took Breece Hall, $77. So Breece Hall was the number 2 fantasy running back last year. He scored 255.5 fantasy points, and that was without Aaron Rodgers, and that was him on a snap count to start the year and sharing carries with Dalvin Cook till they cut him. So over the final 13 games, he averaged 21 touches and 20 fantasy points per game. So he was excellent to finish out the year, and they've fixed up the offensive line. They signed Tyron Smith. They trade for Morgan Moses. So Tyron Smith, future Hall of Famer out of Dallas. Trade for Morgan Moses from the Ravens, and drafted out of Penn State Olu Fashanu, but another tackle, and he's going to be their swing tackle. He literally used a first-round pick on a swing tackle. Probably going to be a starting tackle at some point because Tyron Smith gets hurt like every year and never plays the full season. But point is, using a first-round pick on a swing tackle is like a huge luxury. But they're doing anything they can to kind of go for broke this season, kind of like your team. So all that's to say, the Jets look like a good situation now, suddenly, especially with Aaron Rodgers there. So I'm thinking he might get a little bit more work. He's young, he's in his prime. He'll probably break 1,000 yards. He didn't break 1,000 yards rushing last year. That's crazy to say, but he was 6 yards short. So he'll probably break 1,000 yards, maybe even get 1,100 yards rushing. He'll probably get another 550 yards receiving. Probably the difference between him and McCaffrey, he'll maybe get like 10, 11 touchdowns. So the touchdown, McCaffrey's going to get more. My issue is, Like, spending this much money on, like, your top two players basically means you torpedo whatever depth you have. I mean, you call yourself a glass cannon. I suppose you are. They're star players, so they have value as long as they're healthy, so anyone will trade for them, but you, like, torpedoed whatever depth you have, and it's just, I don't know. Especially because we took Aaron Jones with the next pick. I would have liked Christian McCaffrey and Aaron Jones and maybe one cheaper but good running back just so we could fill out the rest of, like, the receiver room or something. Like, what if it, let's see. Taylor went for 70. I mean, there's running backs. Would it have been so bad if we got, like, Joe Mixon for 42 instead of Breece Hall? Like, maybe Joe Mixon is 65% of what Breece Hall is, but we could have really used that money towards something rather than kind of doing what we're doing here, which is just blowing through our salary on our top three backs and then just basically having replacement level players on the rest of the roster. 17 overall, $27, Aaron Jones. I like Aaron Jones. He's one of my favorite players. He has been for a while. Last year, he was very, very injured. I want to say got injured week 1 with hamstring strain, came back in week 4, came back too early, got re-injured again, came back in week 7, slowly rolled into shape, then got hurt again in week 11, came back in week 15 for me in the playoffs, and then we started playing with some fire. He looked really good in the NFL playoffs too, but last year was his least productive season since his rookie year. And I'm hoping that he rebounds. I'm hoping he looks good in Minnesota, but Minnesota's not Green Bay. Minnesota is starting Sam Darnold now. Justin Jefferson is the guy. Kind of like when Jones was there with Devontae Adams. The difference was they had Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. It's a big step down from MVP version of Aaron Rodgers to today's version of Sam Darnold. I think he could be like a low-end RB2, which is a good flex for you. I don't mind the price. $27 if he stays healthy is absolutely worth it. But taking an off-injured running back when you already have 2 superstar running backs just is a luxury. It's kind of like you bought 2 Ferraris in McCaffrey and Hall, and then you went out and you splurged on a Porsche and Aaron Jones, but you couldn't afford the insurance on any of the 3 because you have, like, no handcuffs, you got no, like, receivers at all. That's kind of the analogy. You got 2 Ferraris and a Porsche, but you can't even afford, like, one insurance payment on any of them. So 90 overall, George Pickens, $4. I like George Pickens. I had him last year. I think he's terrific. I think he's the most talented player on that offense now, currently, even more so than Jaylen Warren. He's the number 1 receiver with Deontay Johnson gone. He was super inconsistent. He would have, like, big boom games. Like, I remember late in the year, he played Cincinnati, he had 4 receptions, but 2 very long touchdowns, so he had, like, 33.5 fantasy points. So huge, big boom games. But I guess the Steelers will have an upgrade at quarterback because Kenny Pickett's bad, and Mason Rudolph's bad, and Russell Wilson is not as bad, and Justin Fields is not as bad, but it's not great. Also, I would say Drake London is better than George Pickens. Now, why do I bring that up? Drake London just went for $40. Well, funny you ask. Drake London, under current Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, never had a top 30 receiving season, ever, in his 3 years there. The only wide receiver to even have a top 25 wide receiver season under Arthur Smith as either offensive coordinator or head coach is A.J. Brown on those Derrick Henry teams. We're talking 5-6 years ago. So is George Pickens, could he have the A.J. Brown production? I mean, I think he's really talented. I don't think Russell Wilson's going to have, like, the late career resurgence that Tannehill had under Arthur Smith, though. So maybe 1,000 yards, maybe 5 touchdowns. He's gonna have a worse season than last year, and that ought to concern you because last year he wasn't good enough to crack my starting lineup most of the time. I have him on my bench, so the fact that he's your number one is just speaks to how little depth you have. Yeah, I mean, there's some weeks he could break out, but realistically, when you have like you have the two Ferraris and the Porsche, you actually want just some consistent floor guys, and Pickens is not that. He's like super boomer bust, specifically because of his offensive coordinator. Let's not shy away from that. We then took pick 143 for $1, Darnell Mooney. Mooney had a bad season in Chicago last year, so 30 catches, 400 yards. He was signed to a lot of money, funny enough, in Atlanta. I guess he's the number 2 next to Drake London now. Atlanta's got a really good offensive line. They got a really good running back. I like Drake London. I like Kyle Pitts. A lot of talent. We'll see if they can actually do something with it. But I have a hard time seeing how Mooney is like better than Drake London, Bijan Robinson, or Kyle Pitts. I feel like he's like the 4th option in that offense. Maybe if he gets deep, he'll have some catches. But I'm thinking like 60 receptions, maybe 800 yards, just being kind, which would give him also kind of like a borderline flex-ish, top 40-ish wide receiver season, top 35-ish. So, like, borderline a starting player in our league, right on the border. But I'm not sure. I haven't seen a lot from Mooney in Chicago that makes me believe that he'll break out in Atlanta. Just kind of how I feel about the next guy, which is Gabe Davis. I mean, I remember that playoff game in Buffalo where he scored 4 touchdowns, and we were hoping he'd break out the next year, and he didn't, and now we're in Jacksonville, and he's just okay. Like, he's very good at catching the ball deep down the field. I think he's, of 111 NFL receivers with at least 100 targets, he is second with 16 yards per reception. So he's really good at getting down the field. But with Brian Thomas Jr. there, I think it's only a matter of time till Thomas Jr. takes that kind of role from him. You don't draft a guy in the first round and just kind of wait behind someone who has less talent than him. I could see also probably like 50 receptions, maybe 800 yards because he gets downfield, maybe 6 TDs. Again, borderline flex starting guy, possibly free agent in our league kind of player. 183, $1, Curtis Samuel. So Curtis Samuel had a rough time in Washington. He had his breakout in Carolina a few years ago, and now he finds himself in Buffalo. Kind of a gadget player, a lot of trick plays with him. I mean, he's good in spurts. I think he's basically the number 2 now in Buffalo. I think we're talking like Keon Coleman, then Curtis Samuel, and then Khalil Shakir. But I feel like Buffalo's going to run the ball more. And, yeah, even with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, I'm not real high on Buffalo's passing offense. So I think Samuel's a good, low-efficiency guy. He's probably, like, waiver wire fonder, if I'm being honest, though, because, like, he'll maybe get 60 receptions, maybe, like, 600 yards, a few touchdowns here or there, but you're never going to know when that is. He's never going to consistently get more than 3 or 4 catches a game, and it's going to be touchdown or bust. He's kind of like, he would be outside like the top 12 tight ends, for example, those kind of numbers. He was like the 43rd best fantasy receiver last year. That's where I kind of got him right now. So we're just taking guys hoping that somebody breaks out. $1, 193rd pick, so 10 picks later, Demario Pop Douglas. So Pop Douglas is the slot receiver for the Patriots. He'll probably lead the Patriots in targets and catches. He's good at finding space in the secondary and reading coverage. But I mean, I don't think he even broke 50 receptions last year, so maybe he'll get like also another 60 reception slot guy with maybe 750 yards and a handful of touchdowns. I think once Jalen Polk is ready and Kendrick Bourne is back from injury reserve, I think they'll get more looks than Douglas. I mean, Douglas is more of like the Wes Welker-ish, but not as prevalent. Like Wes Welker, when he was the slot guy for Tom Brady, was getting like peppered with catches, like almost 120 catches a season. Douglas will be lucky to get half that at 60. So he's a good player, but I don't have any expectation of him being able to be all that great in New England on a team that, frankly, has a bad offensive line. I'm not expecting a whole lot in their passing game. After that, we took Deshaun Watson, but we've since cut him, so we'll kind of skip over that for now. $2.10, $1, Bucky Irving for the Bucks. I like Bucky Irving. I thought he was terrific at Oregon. I was surprised he fell to the 4th round at 125 overall. I know he's on the shorter side, but frankly, he's explosive. He has pretty good vision. He has good acceleration, but not breakaway speed. I mean, now, pound for pound, I think he's better than Rachaad White, if I'm being honest. I think the Bucks trust Rachaad White, which is why he'll be the starter. But I think at some point, if they just, watch the game with their eyes, they'll see that Bucky Irvin is a better rusher than Rachaad White, and he ought to overtake him at some point in the season. So, for now, to start the season, he's probably the third down, check down guy. He's probably getting, stealing off the reception work, so maybe 35 receptions, 300 yards, or we'll say 250. And then another 500 yards rushing for now, because we don't know if the Bucks will actually ever replace Rachaad White as the starter with Irving. I think Irving has a place. I think he's the better player, but just because you're the better player doesn't mean you get a chance. So, yeah, I like the pick, though, just on the off chance Irving actually does get the opportunity to be the number one, because then he might actually do something with it. After that, scroll down, we took Demarcus Robinson at number 235 overall for $1. So he's basically the Van Jefferson replacement. Van Jefferson is now in Pittsburgh. Demarcus Robinson is now the number 3 with the Rams. He was pretty good towards the end of the season, especially because Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp were always injured. So towards the end of the season, when they were both falling apart, he was there, and he's a big play specialist, so he gets deep pretty quickly. I don't mind it per se on the off chance something happens to Puka and Kupp, and that's not a bad bet, especially considering Kupp's missed 13 games total in the last 2 years. He's a good player. You're just kind of going to sit on him. We're talking the 75th best fantasy wide receiver, but he's a starting wide receiver if anything should happen to Nacua or Kupp. I do like him. For $1, that's not bad. We've since cut Miles Sanders, and we cut Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And we picked up, the first one we picked up is Tank Bigsby. I think that's a good pickup. I don't know why Charlotte did not pick up Tank Bigsby, especially because Tank is the handcuff to Travis Etienne, who Charlie spent a lot of money on. I think he's a big, tall player. He only ran the ball 50 times last year, so he wasn't great. I think he might get more play this year. Excuse me, just to keep Travis Etienne healthy, and if anything should happen to Etienne, then Bigsby is kind of ready to fill those shoes. He's a really good player. He's just a different style of back. Etienne's more finesse and more acceleration through the hole. Bigsby's just a big back who kind of bruises his way through. He's good insurance if anything should happen to Etienne, and I could see 100 carries, 450 yards, and 4 touchdowns if he plays the whole season. and ETN doesn't get hurt the whole season. But I'm never down on taking backup running backs. I think you should always collect as many running backs as you can, just because injuries are very prevalent. Then we also picked up Kareem Hunt, who's not on a team right now. Not really sure why we did that. Maybe we thought he would re-sign with the Browns. I mean, he had an okay season last year with the Browns after they signed him after Nick Chubb got hurt. But, yeah, don't love it. So, why do I have this team 11th if they have two superstar players? I mean, it's just kind of essentially almost like an auto draft team because you basically just blew as much money on players that you could at the very beginning and then just kind of wishfully hope for the best. Even during your second championship run where you kind of built a team like this, Christian McCaffrey got traded at basically mid-season, and then you still had Chuba Hubbard, his handcuff, who then took the starting job and turned into a player for you, a starter for you. You also had Amari Cooper back then, who was still a very good player. But I think you also had Cordero Patterson, if I remember correctly, back then too. So yeah, you had like quite a few good running backs. My point is, what I'm trying to say is, I think that team only won 4 games in the regular season and managed to like sneak into the playoffs with the most points scored. That's kind of what you're going to have to do this year. And while that may have worked at the time, I don't think the lesson was to double down and do it like this, because this is an even more extreme version of that. Because you have no depth. Like I just talked about it, you at least back then had Chuba Hubbard, who instantly became like a top 15 running back for you in fantasy. You also had Amari Cooper, who was a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy. Unless Pickens becomes that, I don't see any of your receivers doing that. And you don't have the. I think Jones might be that for Chuba Hubbard, but you don't have any of the handcuffs for any of McCaffrey, Hall, or Jones. So I would have preferred just getting McCaffrey and Jones, and then getting like a middle ranged running back. Heck, even ETN for like $60 would have been fine, because then we could take like the extra 17, get a couple of the handcuffs, and then maybe get like one starting caliber good wide receiver. I mean, it wouldn't have cost us a lot to get like Brandon Ayuk for $16 or Zay Flowers for like $9, or like, I don't know, Tank Dell for $11. I'm not talking like superstar players, but like something, some depth would have been nice. I mean, you call this team a glass cannon, and it is, but it's even more, and it's a more extreme version of it, because you essentially now need McCaffrey and Hall to go off, at least one of them to go off every single week, and that's asking for a lot. You might sneak into the playoffs. I don't think you'll be like a top seed, but you might sneak into the playoffs with the most points scored among the bottom teams, and that would be a path to maybe pursuing a championship, but I don't know. You need a lot of things to break right, and you also need to stay healthy, and that's expecting a lot. And you've gotten rid of Deshaun Watson, and you've taken Brock Purdy, which kind of lowers your upside because Purdy plays quarterback and McCaffrey plays running back for the 49ers. So if the 49ers have a bad game, then you instantly have a bad game, and you probably lose. So you got a lot of work to do. The whole entire bench, except for maybe Irving and maybe Bigsby, can be turned over. You got to find like some sort of 2 or 3 starting caliber players like you did back then. Because I mean, this just ain't like, yeah, this has no depth. There's not a whole lot to go on here. I mean, even back then in that championship season, I think you had Jerry Jeudy, who was pretty good. Obviously, I mentioned Cordero Patterson. You had, also Courtland Sutton, who had a good season. Your top 2 players were like McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. So McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Courtland Sutton, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy were all 5 top 20 players at their position that season. Obviously, McCaffrey and Henry were the best, and they carried you, but you only won 4 games, and you managed to get the most points scored to get in. And I think I'm confused, especially considering like your other championship team was just so well built, so complete, so dominant. And instead of doing something like that, trying to get a good team, trying to fill out the bench, trying to have trade fonder, trying to be able to build a complete team, we kind of leaned into the outlier team that we liked once upon a time and kind of hope for the best. I don't know. I don't like relying on hope. And this team is very reliant on hope. Other than Pickens, I think all of your receivers are bad. I think your running backs are good, obviously. I think they're very good. I think Purdy's a quality starting quarterback. It's just going to be tough with him and McCaffrey starting every week. But I guess that can work. Realistically, I think if your season starts to slide, you probably got to trade one of the running backs. If you really don't want to trade McCaffrey and you really don't want to trade Hall, you're probably going to have to trade Aaron Jones. You're probably going to have to do it before he gets injured. I think he's probably going to get injured because he was pretty off injured for me last season. So, will he have value? Yeah, absolutely. But you're going to need to probably move one of the running backs for like 2 or 3 receivers because it's going to kill you if Samuel has like 0 points or if like Demario Douglas catches 0 passes in a game. And that's very easy to see them doing that because they're in low scoring, low output, very little passing offenses, and they're not the first options in those offenses. So, hell, I could see freaking George Pickens having low games because he had low games for me last year. There were games where he did not have a catch. Or I remember a game where he had 1 catch for 9 yards, and I'm just like, what the hell? And that's going to be like the norm for you. Like, you're going to get that like every single week. What you want is consistency. I think it'll be easier to find consistent receivers, but you don't have any consistency right now. So I got you at 11. You can argue with me. I think your upside's obviously championship level upside. I can't really argue with McCaffrey and Hall carrying you there. But it's going to be very difficult for you to get into the playoffs without some sort of trade to find some receiver somewhere. I think your best course of action would probably be moving Aaron Jones while he's healthy and getting something to start at receiver, even if you settled for like a $9 player at receiver, like Zay Flowers went for $9. It would have served you better to have like Zay Flowers for like $9, and we'll say Keon Coleman for $6, and Raheem Mostert for like $9. So that's $24. It would have served you better to do that than like triple down with McCaffrey, Hall, and Jones. I think switching out one of them and just kind of putting their money into like at least a couple more starters would have really, really helped your team depth, because if someone goes down, if no insurance policy on any of these dudes, there goes your season. So it's you call yourself a glass cannon. I don't really see it as a glass cannon. I see you more as like a one-way bridge. You're a one-way bridge. You have some metal beams. They're very strong metal beams, but you're kind of like a truck on that bridge, and someone might just be stupid and go one way, the other way, and run into you, and then you go crashing down into the cavern. So knocking the whole bridge down. That's kind of like your season. If you blow a tire, there goes your season. If another car comes the other way, there goes your season. If a beam goes out, there goes the season. You need some sort of production out of wide receiver. You can't just have zeros. And all these guys are not in good situations. I guess you can maybe figure it out as you go. Like maybe you'll just like sift through it, but I don't know. Kind of like how I found like Puka Nacua and I found like good players on free agency. That's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to dig on free agency hard to find some receivers that can really fit you. And yeah, I just don't. You have upside, but your floor is very, very low, and that's why I can't put you any higher than this. You can disagree with me. It's fine. I really think McCaffrey is incredible. I think Brees Hall is very good. Aaron Jones is one of my favorite players. But it really would have behooved you to like at least pocket some of the money on one of those guys and just get some sort of depth, something to kind of like spread it out rather than just like a bunch of basically free agency level receivers, man. Like it's going to be really, really tough without a trade. So, I mean, good luck to you though. I mean, we'll see what happens. Prove me wrong. Kind of like prove me wrong about Russell Wilson, and here we are. He's on the Steelers, and I have very little hope for him. So it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't finish the season as the starting quarterback. It's kind of like that. I don't like to believe in hope in my sports teams. It's not a good way to operate.